I closed at a 95% close rate selling a $6,000 product. That's over $60,000 in cash collected in just 7 days. And over 12 months, I actually ended up going from 0 to 40K a month as a high ticket closer. And in this video, I'm going to break down 7 things that honestly help me close at such a high percentage. That way you can implement them in your own sales calls. And my first tip is the best objection handling I've seen is never needing to handle objections in the first place. It is a lot easier to handle objections before you drop the price compared to after you drop the price. I'll give you an example of this. Picture this. Think of the last time that you bought something expensive. A car, a bag, a house, a high ticket product, whatever it is. When you heard the price of 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, your heart rate goes up. You start sweating. 50 different things start going through your mind. Imagine the emotions that you had on the other end. That is exactly how your prospect feels, if not worse. So trying to handle objections and going into high pressure situations after you drop a price on a prospect is probably the most inefficient way to go about it because they will not absorb more than 10%. However, if we handle and uncover objections before the price drop, prospects are way more open. They have no resistance. We haven't dropped the price and they're way more open to change, which will allow you to close people at a higher level. For context, when I was at 10K a month with high ticket sales, I used to sell with a script and it was a very Q&A type script. And I would always get these objections of think about it, partner, I don't have the money. And honestly, my calls would go for around 1 to 2 hours plus if I did close them after objection handling them for 40 minutes. Not only was this draining mentally, but I used to get really tired after calls too, physically. And it was only after I hit 40K a month that I realized I can actually make more money with less work if I just get better at sales. So the main takeaway is if you do discovery right, objections will be more like confirmation questions and you'll get those magical objectionless piffs. Now, tip number 2 is sales isn't about pushing. It's actually about being curious. Like shift your mentality from I need this sale for me to pay my bills to actually being curious to seeing people's story. Curious to see their limiting beliefs, curious to see how you can help, because naturally the more curious you are, the more they feel like you have their best interests at heart, which is true at the end of the day. So how do you be curious? It's not just by saying, hey, just curious. It's not just by saying certain word tracks. An underrated tip that I learned through my journey going from 0 to 40K is being curious is all about how you sound, your tonality at the end of the day. And when you have that curious tonality, prospects tend to just open up naturally and it becomes 10x easier. So the more curious you are, the more they sell themselves. And tip number 3 is people buy your energy before they buy your product. Picture this. Let's say you're going on a morning walk, having a great time. It's a nice sunny day and you run into a stranger. They shake your hand and they go, hey man, how are you? Compared to you meet another guy down the road and he comes up to you and says, hey bro, what's going on? It's a great day today. What have you been up to? Do you see how that energy is completely different? And the reality is most of you watching this video think that it's so obvious that you should sound like that second person. But the reality is when you actually take your sales calls, most likely you're leaning towards that first guy. And that is not what you want to do, because when you're flat, when you have low energy, the prospect also comes in with low energy. And one of the biggest lessons that I learned from my mentors is you should always have 10 to 20% higher energy than the person that's on the other side of the call. And I'm going to share an embarrassing story of when I was doing high ticket sales. And this is before 10K a month. I was doing around 5 to 6K a month, my first month in closing. And I had the worst monotone that I've ever heard of. To this day, I still believe I had the worst tonality starting off in this space. And I just sounded like a robot. But in my head, I thought I sounded super energetic, bouncing off the walls and full of positivity. But when I actually listened to my calls after, it was a completely different story. And basically, long story short, my offer owner that I was closing for at the time, he clipped a recording of one of my closes and just flamed me. He memed me in the entire sales chat. And it was so embarrassing and I felt so ashamed of myself. But it was actually the best thing that ever happened because I never made that mistake again. And I made sure to double and triple my energy more than what I thought I sounded like. That way I can get to the next level. So the takeaway from this is the tonality that you come into the call will pretty much dictate how the rest of the call goes as well. Now, tip number 4 is scripts don't close deals. People do. and this is very important, instead of forcing like a structure, a Q&A, a very rigid call, and asking questions that don't really make sense, instead just relax, calm down, match their personality, and actually listen to the prospect. It's a very underrated tip. And I'll give you a really good example of this. When I was doing 40K a month, on the opportunity I was on, there was always people that were crushing it and making good commissions. And one guy on the opportunity, I would listen to his calls, and he would literally read the script word for word. Every single word was set to a T. And it was very Q&A. It was very unnatural, and he had a big monotone. Kudos to him. He closed at a decent close rate of 30% by society standards. But for me, I always wanted to be the best. I wanted to get to the next level. And I actually doubled, if not tripled, his close rate for that month and overall, purely because I listened to the prospect. I had their best interests at heart. I actually didn't even have a script open. I would just listen to the prospect and follow the frameworks that I've learned in high ticket sales. So that's my biggest takeaway. Learn the framework, but make the call a human conversation at the end of the day. Now, tip number 5, in my opinion, is my favorite tip out of all of these. And that is always have the same side of table energy. If your prospect feels like you're across the table from them, you've already lost. You need to be on the same side of the table with their best interests at heart. And this is a very odd take. A lot of people don't talk about this. Many closers confuse leadership with domination. Real sales is actually collaboration to help the prospects come to the realization on their own. And a lot of closers in this industry, there's this whole vibe of trying to checkmate people, trying to collect commissions, trying to close people. I just hate that word. The reality is you're helping people overcome their limiting beliefs. And the reason I know this is true is because I've closed at a very high level, at very high percentages, way above the average close rate in this industry. And I would have prospects that I close, that I piff, and at the end of the call, they would come and say, Kashi, thank you so much for changing my life. Kashi, thank you so much for helping me come to the realization. Prospects would literally thank me after they've paid me. And that is the type of selling that you want. And the reason why this selling is so goated is you literally don't run into any fulfillment issues. So when you close people with the same side of table energy, you don't get any refunds. Second is when you close people like this, you get objectionless closes. And the main takeaway is at the end of the day, it is your duty to help people overcome their limiting beliefs and come to a decision, even more than getting the commissions itself. Now, tip number 6, amateurs, average sales reps, they practice until they get it right. But the pros, the top 1% sales reps that I know, they review their calls and practice until they can't get it wrong. You need to treat high ticket sales like you're an athlete. And this is the best analogy that I can give. Imagine you're a big basketball player or a big UFC fighter. Everything that you do in your life is dedicated toward that craft. It's dedicated towards that sport. And that's the mindset that you need to have coming into high ticket sales, an athlete mindset. So if you're a basketball player or you're a UFC fighter, you're reviewing your game tape. You're reviewing your games maybe 5 times, 6 times, 10 times, 20 times to make sure that you get it correctly. And the best legends in sports, the best legends in any space, they're the ones who practice until they don't get anything wrong again. And an example of this is how I went from 10 to 40K a month. When I went from 0 to 10K, I'll be honest, I was cruising and I didn't really do a whole lot of call reviews. I was kind of just winging it, following a sales script and going from there. But for me to go from 10 to 40K a month and get to those top 1% levels, a lot of things had to change in terms of my routines. I would do call reviews every single day. Like any minute I wasn't on sales calls, I'd be reviewing my calls. Again, it's having that athlete mindset. So biggest takeaway, one tweak from reviewing your calls can actually add thousands, if not hundreds of thousands to your income. And finally, tip number 7, needing or wanting the sale is literally the fastest way to lose it. You might as well shoot yourself in the foot. Desperation kills trust. And at the end of the day, detachment from the outcome will build your trust. Think about it. If you're so attached to the outcome, you're so attached to money, you're so attached to getting people's money and commissions, that energy will transfer to the prospect. And when you're so attached to the outcome, you start overthinking things. Should I ask this question or that question? Should I say it in this way or that way? And you just overthink and basically you're self-sabotaging yourself. And I'll share a story with you. One of the best opportunities that I was on that led me to make 40K a month, we actually got flown out to a trip in Bali where we had a whole mastermind, and I was learning directly from the founder who does $1 million a month in revenue for his business. And the best advice that I ever got from him was, Kashi, just don't think. Just stop thinking. And initially I was like, what do you mean, like, don't thinking? Like, yeah, obviously I don't want to think. I don't want to overthink it. But that advice was actually the thing that changed my entire process. And I started to just detach myself. And before every single call, I'd tell myself, all right, the outcome doesn't matter. Let me just detach. I'm not going to think. I'm just going to follow my process. And when you say that detached, you let your natural instincts take over and the prospects end up closing. So biggest takeaway is detach from the sale and attach to the service of helping the people come to their own decision. Cool. So those are the 7 things that help me hit a 95% close rate selling a $6,000 product. Pre-handling objections, curiosity, energy, adaptability, same side of table energy, core reviews, and at the end of the day, detachment as well. And if you want me to break down those strategies in more depth and even review one of your own calls, drop a comment on the YouTube or go to the description and flick me a DM on Instagram and I'll see if I can help. Other than that, I hope you found some value as always, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.